The Big Bang. Nothing but pure exergy at the creation of space and time. Dissipating ever since, seeking equilibrium, the energy from that beginning fluxes through dissipative structures of every kind, producing complexity as it goes. Partially condensing into matter, the exergy soon produces galaxies. Within galaxies, the fusion furnaces that power the stars produce complex chemical elements like carbon, oxygen, and iron. On the early Earth, itself formed from the dust of exploded stars, lightning and radiation turned some of that stardust into complex organic molecules, and out of these, in some manner, come living organisms, yet another kind of dissipative structure. Always evolving, these organisms diversify into a bewildering array of exquisitely complex life forms. Groups of interadapted species, in turn, produce complex ecosystems. Sentient organisms produce complex social bonds and interactions. When the organisms are sapient, they produce cultures, societies, and eventually civilizations, the most complex dissipative structures of all, partaking as they do of every kind of complexity that came before. Civilizations are a fairly recent plot twist in the human story. Anatomically modern humans have been around for at least 200,000 years. Cultural artifacts were being made at least 45,000 years ago, and evidence of human settlements with social stratification date from at least 25,000 years ago. But the earliest civilizations developed only about 12,000 years ago, and the first truly urban environments only about 5,000 years ago. Your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother lived in a world with no metropolis. Because civilizations are dissipative structures, it makes sense to trace this history in energy terms. Consider a hunter-gatherer society. Their energy capture strategy is to forage edible plants and hunt available game. This energy provides for personal maintenance, that is, for early physical growth and for continuing health, and it also provides the energy for activities like fashioning tools and shelter, for reproduction, for the raising of children and care of the sick and elderly, and, of course, for foraging and hunting, which must be continued on an ongoing basis. They also obtain energy from burning wood to cook, to keep warm, and to discourage predators. These uses of energy fall into three broad categories. First are the metabolic uses. This is the energy that is expended to maintain the society, to keep bellies filled and bodies warm, and to provide for the artifacts such as clothing, tools, and shelter that are necessary to life, and which must be repaired or replaced at intervals. It also includes the cost of having and raising children, to continually replace the members who age out. Second comes the energy cost of obtaining energy. A hunter tracking prey burns far more calories than a hunter sitting by the fire, and a forager likewise. Special weapons and tools are also required. The extra calories burned are an energy cost of obtaining energy. When the whole tribe must move to follow migrating prey or the ripening of different sources of plant food, this too is an energy cost of energy. Finally, if game and forage are abundant and so there's more energy available than the energy cost of metabolism and the energy cost of energy combined, then the excess can be saved for the future or used to feed more children, and thus the tribe can grow. This is sometimes referred to as an anabolic use of energy. There are considerable upsides to the hunter-gatherer life, despite the absence of most amenities. In good times, the working hours are not long. There are few bosses, and plenty of leisure for music, storytelling, and art. On the other hand, it is a very vulnerable life. Prey populations can fluctuate wildly from year to year. There can be great competition for food sources, and disease is a scourge, especially for those weakened by hunger. 1 or 2 bad seasons can bring devastation. A major shift in climate can result in extinction. Another characteristic of hunter-gatherer societies is that they don't change much. They are typically bound by tradition and have little scope for cultural, social, or technological development. Whether this is a bug or a feature probably depends on your point of view. The central problem of the hunter-gatherer, that of food intermittency, is solved by domestication of animals. If you can tame your prey, cultivate their most desirable traits, and take them with you wherever you go, then you always have food. Thus the hunter becomes the herder. Around the same time this happened, about 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age was ending, domestication of plants also began. The ability to produce crops of grain to dry and store meant that oneself and one's animals could be fed without spending most of the year on the march in search of good forage. For the first time, human groups could thrive while staying in one place year-round. Given fertile soil and clement weather, a settlement could reliably capture a lot more energy from agriculture than was needed for metabolic use, and at a lower energy cost of energy than hunting and gathering. We should introduce a distinction at this point that will explain a great deal later on. Much of the time, the energy available to hunter-gatherers was unlimited. The world is a big place, and in the past it contained an abundance of game and edible plants. However, the energy cost of capturing that energy was fairly high, and once you captured it, about the most you could do with it is eat it. This is fine if all you're supporting is a hunter-gatherer lifestyle with limited increase and very limited complexity. A few hours a day capturing energy and you're set. But hunter-gatherers have pretty much hit their limit in energy acquisition, regardless of the abundance of energy in their environment. The energy cost of energy can be very hard to measure precisely, but it is probably in the neighborhood of 30 to 50% for hunter-gatherers. That is, about 1/3 to 1/2 of the energy they acquire from their environment has to be reinvested in activities that are directed toward acquiring more energy. The rest goes to metabolic costs, and in fat years to growth. Another convenient way of characterizing the energy cost of energy is by taking the ratio and flipping it upside down. The result is known as energy return on investment, abbreviated EROI. Take the example of a 50% energy cost of energy for hunter-gatherers. If acquiring energy costs half the energy they get, then an investment of 1 unit of energy repays 2 units of energy. We say the EROI for hunting-gathering is about 2, perhaps as high as 3 in a fat year, one with little competition for plentiful game and forage. If food becomes scarce, the EROI can drop, because then it takes more energy to find enough so that metabolic needs can still be met on top of the energy cost of energy. If the EROI were to fall to 1, which would correspond to an energy cost of energy of 100%, that would mean all the energy that could be acquired would have to be spent just on acquiring energy. That can't happen. Before it ever got to that point, the hunter-gatherers would already perish, because they couldn't meet their metabolic needs. They'd starve. The energy return on investment for agriculturalists, assuming fertile soil and a congenial climate, is typically a little better than for hunter-gatherers overall, perhaps as high as 3.5 or even 4, corresponding to an energy cost of energy of about 25%. Farming communities are still at the mercy of external factors like droughts, floods, and plagues, of course, and the EROI can drop badly. But the real advantage of agriculture is that the fat years can better be taken advantage of, storing surpluses against bad years. This was a revolution in energy capture terms. It meant a degree of stability unknown to the hunter-gatherer, with growth now possible in place across many generations. This is how civilization began. And since civilizations are dissipative structures, we would expect that any increase in reliable energy would result in a corresponding increase in their complexity. Checking the want ads in a hunter-gatherer society would be a dull pursuit. There's hunter, of course, and gatherer. You might find an opening for shaman if you're old enough and thought wise, but that's about it. There's really only one boss, the tribal leader. There are lots more opportunities in a farming village. In addition to herder and farmer, and depending on the size of the settlement, there might be builder, brewer, tanner, miller, medic, priest, and so on. Hierarchies come to exist, not just between villagers and leaders, but between laborers, apprentices, and journeymen. With paths between villages becoming roads, soon there are traders, and law-keepers too. Speaking of trade, this too is an energy revolution, a marked improvement in humanity's energy capture strategy, because with trade, scarcity in one resource can be resolved by trading a more abundant resource for it, enhancing EROI on both sides of the deal. Reciprocity among groups grows into formal trade arrangements, and competition among them results in both diplomacy and organized conflict. There are indeed downsides. The temptation to theft only becomes easier to rationalize as organized societies become larger. It takes the form of oppression within groups and aggression between them. Internally, a division into classes allows an underclass to be exploited for its labor by an upper class that uses its advantage to reinforce its status. Externally, a stronger society can demand tribute from a weaker one, increasing its own EROI at the other's expense. Or indeed, a weaker region can simply be conquered and plundered of its resources. Soon there are militaries, bureaucracies, guilds, cults, and hereditary rulers. The result of all this was the emergence of the great agricultural empires of the ancient world. By extracting tribute and taxes and by conquering and plundering, they could increase the EROI of their urban imperial centers far above those of mere self-sustaining agricultural communities. They became magnificent. As social roles proliferated into the hundreds or even thousands of distinct occupations, culture flourished. Literature, science, music, scholarship, and religion all reached heights of expression that we still cherish and build upon, even thousands of years later. And so it went for a long time, because there really wasn't a way to push the energy envelope much further. The social and technological complexity of the High Middle Ages was only marginally greater than that of the great ancient civilizations. But then something happened that brought about a change so enormous it beggars any attempt at comparison with what had come before. In the 18th century, the first practical heat engines were invented. Now, people had long tinkered with the black ooze that flowed from the ground in places, and it was well known that certain types of flinty black rock would burn hotter and longer than even the densest hardwoods. But it was not until the invention of practical external and internal combustion engines that it became possible to fully exploit the extraordinary energy density of fossil fuels. Recall the maximum entropy production principle, which tells us that every dissipative system will tend to evolve into states that use its available energy as fast as it is able to. Up to the 18th century, the only practical energy available to humanity was solar energy, mostly that which was converted by plants into food, wood, and fodder. This energy could only be used at the rate that the sun's radiation and the Earth's biological systems provided it, and so there was a natural limit to civilizational size and complexity. However, every year, some of the hydrocarbons that plants produce get buried. Over a period of 500 million years, more than 10 million billion tons of carbon got sequestered in the earth, in the form of coal, oil, and natural gas. That's a lot of sunlight. And when civilization went from using a steady supply of regular sunlight to tapping the planet's secret stash of fossil sunlight, It went from being a steadily burning fire to one having vast quantities of gasoline poured on it all at once. It literally exploded. This is immediately obvious from a graph of the human population over time. Before agriculture began, there were at most a few million of our species scattered over the globe. With agriculture, although fluctuating some depending on climate, we slowly expanded. After 10,000 years, at the height of the Roman Empire, there were more than 200 million humans on Earth. At that time there came along a period, a couple of millennia, of an unusually temperate and stable global climate, and by the year 1800 of the current era, there were nearly 1,000 million of us. Now it's just 200 years later, and gonna have to shrink the graph. That's not just a ski jump. It's not just exponential growth. It's an explosion. If we readjust the graph to show us population growth just since 1800 and superimpose it on the growth in our energy use over the same period, we see that they track very closely. Why is this? Well, suppose we had to rely on people power alone. A typical human being can produce about 75 watts of power for 8-ish hours of real labor that could dig a ditch or sew garments or prepare and give lessons or research a new technology. That's about 600 watt-hours of work per day, with the fuel for that power being provided by the food that person eats each day. A barrel of oil, given typical efficiencies of the engines in which it is burned, can produce about 1,700 kilowatt-hours of work, or 1.7 million watt-hours. A little arithmetic shows us that a barrel of oil can do as much work as one person working for more than 22,000 hours, or in other words, as much as someone working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, for more than 11 years. The wealthiest Roman citizens back in the day might own a couple dozen slaves who did almost all their work for them. The 330 million citizens of the United States consume 20 million barrels of oil per day, performing an average of 100,000 watt-hours of work per person per day. To get that much work out of people power, each American would have to own 170 slaves. And that's just oil. We also burn vast quantities of coal and natural gas. The work being done on behalf of just an ordinary member of modern civilization by their energy slaves, fueled by fossil sunlight, is an order of magnitude greater than even the wealthiest elites of past empires. It is on this account that our civilization, with its thousands upon thousands of social roles, its vast libraries of technical knowledge, and its bewildering and ever-growing organizational complexity, sprang into being in a mere 2 centuries, the blink of an eye in the long sweep of human history. If you got the education I did growing up, you were probably allowed to believe that the grandeur of modern civilization is owing to the unique cleverness and other virtues of the people living in it. This is a conceit, and a very dangerous one. It's true that human cleverness and invention were involved, but nobody planned this civilization, and nobody controls it. It is a dissipative structure that has grown in size and complexity in proportion to the flow of energy through it, and neither the size nor the complexity can be maintained without that energy. Indeed, as we will see, it can't be sustained even if the amount of energy it is using now could continue as it is. We will turn our attention to that very unsettling fact in our next video. As always, thank you for watching.